Participial phrases can be thought of as compressed independent clauses, subordinate clauses, or relative clauses. Participial phrases are considered a more advanced grammatical structure than subordinate and relative clauses because they're more economical, they're shorter, and flexible. They can be placed in more locations than a relative clause. They're not called clauses because they don't have a subject or a verb. Participial phrases start with participles, which are adjectives that have an active voice and passive voice version. Active voice participial phrases, the most common, start with ing words called active participles, like dropping or walking. Passive voice participial phrases start with passive participles, which look like the third form of the verb, as in give, gave, given, steal, stole, stolen. Most people are familiar with active voice and passive voice verbs, but many people have never heard of active and passive adjectives. Let's do a quick refresher on active and passive verbs and then move on to active and passive participles. It's called active and passive voice because it refers to who is speaking, the agent or patient of the verb. This sentence has an active voice verb. The doctor helped the victim of the accident. The doctor is the agent of the verb helped. The doctor is responsible for providing the help. The victim of the accident is the patient of the verb helped. The victim is not responsible for providing the help. The victim is the recipient of the help. This sentence has a passive voice verb. The victim of the accident was helped by the doctor. In passive voice, we flip the agent and patient around the verb and transform the verb into its passive form. Some adjectives also have an active and passive form. These are called participles. Participial phrases start with these kinds of words. Many adjectives do not have active and passive versions, like big, black, strange. However, many adjectives have active and passive forms. The exciting performer, the excited crowd, the boring teacher, the bored students, a confusing explanation, a confused listener. All of these words precede a noun, which makes them adjectives, but they come in two forms. Why? What pattern do you notice? What do the active and passive forms have in common? The active voice participles, the ones with an ing ending, refer to the source of the experience. In these examples, the performer, the teacher, and the explanation are the source of the feeling or experience. The passive voice participles, which use the third form of the verb, as in give, gave, given, refer to the one having the experience. The crowd, the students, and the listener are the ones having the experience. They are not its source. In other words, they are the passive recipients of the experience. Participial phrases can be thought of as compressed, independent, subordinate, or relative clauses. This lesson will cover transformations of independent clauses, subordinate clauses, and relative clauses into participial phrases. The procedure to transform an independent clause into a participial phrase is 1. Remove the subject. 2. Remove any auxiliary or helper verbs. 3. Transform the verb into a participle. If the verb is in active voice, regardless of verb tense, it becomes the ing active voice participle. If the verb is in passive voice, regardless of verb tense, it becomes the passive participle, the third form. For example, take, took, taken. Again, the independent clause to participial phrase transformation process is 1. Delete the subject, 2. Delete any auxiliary or helper verbs, and 3. Transform the verb into its participle. The fox jumped up. He tried to reach the grapes that were hanging from the tree. So we delete the subject, he. There is no auxiliary verb in this case. Since the verb tried is in active voice, it is in past tense, but active voice. Tense and voice are completely different things. We transform the verb into its active participle, the ing version of the word trying. The fox jumped up, trying to reach the grapes that were hanging from the tree. Passive voice. When a verb is in passive voice, we follow the same process but use the passive participle, the third form of the verb. The verb will already be in this form if it's in passive voice. The boy was tempted by the jar of cookies. The boy jumped up to reach the shelf. Delete the subject, the boy. Delete the auxiliary verb, was. Since the verb tempted is in passive voice, we can leave it as is. Tempted by the jar of cookies, the boy jumped up to reach the shelf. Subordinate clause to participial phrase transformation process. Step 1. Delete the subordinating conjunction in the subordinate clause. We can leave some conjunctions, for example, while, after, or before. 2. Delete the subject. 3. Delete any auxiliaries, helper verbs. 4. Transform the verb into its active or passive participle. Because the fox failed to reach the grapes, he disparaged them and said, "What does it matter? They must be sour." We delete the subordinating conjunction because. We delete the subject, the fox. There's no auxiliary verb. Transform the active voice verb, failed, into its active participle, failing. Failing to reach the grapes, the fox disparaged them and said, "What does it matter? They must be sour." Important note: participial phrases do not have time information. Many texts call these structures present participial phrases and past participial phrases. However, this text refers to active voice participial phrases and passive voice participial phrases because the participial phrase does not convey time information because it doesn't have a verb. The time information is conveyed through the conjugated verb in the independent clause, not in the participial phrase. This is also what makes the grammar of participial phrases easy to remember. They don't change regardless of the tense of the rest of the sentence. The time information is carried by the independent clause, which has the main verb. Whether the context is past, present, or future time, the participial phrase construction is identical. Here's an example. While we were walking through the woods, we saw deer. This becomes walking through the woods, we saw deer. Here's a present simple example. Whenever we walk through the woods, we see deer all the time. This becomes walking through the woods, we see deer all the time. Here's present continuous used for the future. When we're walking through the woods later today, we'll probably see deer. This becomes walking through the woods later today, we'll probably see deer. Relative clause to participial phrase transformation process. 1. Delete the relative pronoun. 2. Delete any auxiliaries or helper verbs. 3. Transform the verb into its participle. The fox jumped up. He tried to reach the grapes that were hanging from the tree. 1. Delete the relative pronoun that. 2. Delete the auxiliary were. 3. Transform the active voice verb hanging into its participle. No changes are needed in this case. The fox jumped up. He tried to reach the grapes hanging from the tree. Here's an example with multiple clauses. The fox jumped up. He tried to reach the grapes that were hanging from the tree. The fox jumped up, trying to reach the grapes hanging from the tree. Or, jumping up, the fox tried to reach the grapes hanging from the tree. Participial phrase placement is more flexible than relative clause placement. Relative clauses must go directly after the idea they are related to. Participial phrases can often be placed in more than one spot in a sentence. Here's an example with a relative clause. The patient, who was badly injured, was brought to the clinic. The relative clause cannot be placed anywhere else in this sentence. But if we turn it into a participial phrase, we can put it in several places. Badly injured, the patient was brought to the clinic. The patient, badly injured, was brought to the clinic. The patient was brought badly injured to the clinic. The patient was brought to the clinic badly injured.